So good afternoon. It is Friday. It is time for our lunch and learn, and it's a little bit of a different format today because we're having just some Facebook issues. So you may see this on a different platform. But today we're going to be talking about the difference between traditional Chinese medicine, bioenergetic medicine, which are very, very similar, and then your allopathic Western model. So I'm going to tell you a little story. I'm going to read you a little story first, and then that's going to set the stage for what we want to talk about, because we at Abundant Health and Wellness, we look at the body as a whole, not as a separate type of components to your body. Okay, so this is an old story. This happened in about 400, okay, so a long time ago. It says between 407 and 310 BC. So that's a long, long time ago. So this happened during the Chinese period that was called the Warring States period. Now, this doctor, his name is Bain Q. He went to visit Duke Han, all right, who was a some kind of a political guy in China during this time. The doctor, which was a traditional Chinese medicine doctor, warned him, "You have an illness on your skin." The Duke dismissed the concerns, scoffing, "I'm not sick, you're just a charlatan and you just want my money." 5 days later, the doctor returned and said, "The illness has entered into your blood vessels. If left untreated, the consequences will be serious." And again, the Duke was annoyed and he just ignored him. Another 5 days passed, and the doctor warned, "The illness has now reached your intestines. The situation is critical." Still, the Duke paid no attention. Now, 5 days later, upon seeing the Duke again, the doctor turned and walked away. When asked why, the doctor replied, "The illness has entered into your bone marrow, and I cannot cure it. It cannot be cured." 5 days later, the Duke felt gravely ill, but by then the doctor had already left the province and the Duke soon died. Now, this is documented. This is a real story documented in the records of the Grand Historian. So this particular Chinese doctor possessed the extraordinary ability to see through the body, detecting issues in the organs before the symptoms manifested. Now, we're kind of like that with our bioenergetic medicine. You might come in, you might feel fine, something's not quite right, but the doctor doesn't give you a diagnosis, anything like that. But you come in and we use our tool and we do bioenergetic frequency testing, and we can tell where something is inside the body, even though it hasn't necessarily manifested yet. So in that way, holistic medicine and traditional Chinese medicine is the same. So one of the things you need to know about traditional Chinese medicine is that they use the 5 elements and 5 tastes in order to detect what's going on in your body. And this is very out of the ordinary for us Westerners, okay? And traditional Chinese medicine has been practiced, I think, for about 4,000 years. Somebody can probably fact check me on that. But they don't have supernatural insight. They just use the body and they look at the body as a whole. Now, what is the way that traditional Chinese medicine works? Well, Western medicine views the body like a car. It has different systems that needs different inputs and outputs. It's very concrete and logical. Traditional Chinese medicine, on the other hand, doesn't focus on science and medicine. Instead, it is based on balance, harmony, and energy. Those are the 2 central ideas behind traditional Chinese medicine. One of them is Qi. Now, it sounds like CHI, but it's spelled QI, Qi. It is known as the vital life force or life energy. Now, the belief is that this Qi runs through your body. It's always on the move, and it constantly changes. Traditional Chinese medicine focuses on ways to promote and maintain the flow of Qi. Now, if you're a Western person and you're really focused on the science and medicine and that kind of thing, let me just help you out here. You can see on my wrist, you can see that I've got blood vessels, right? If you have a microscope, an electron microscope, a very powerful electron microscope, if you were to look into this area, okay, you could see that on top of my blood vessels are my lymphatic vessels. You can't see that with the naked eye. And then you could see that on top of those lymphatic vessels are the meridians, the traditional Chinese meridians that run through our body. This is the energy. This is the life force. This is, we say all the time, I don't have any energy, or my energy was low today, or wow, I had a lot of energy today, right? Well, that is true. In Western science, we don't have a name for it, but in traditional Chinese medicine and in bioenergetic medicine, we call it the life force, or we just call it frequency. All right, everything that moves has frequency. Everything that's alive has frequency. And if you remember back in your 4th grade health class, they talked to you about your food groups and all that kind of stuff. And we also had a lesson in the science class about atoms and how atoms are always on the move. And we were all just incredulous when our teacher, touched our desk that was hard and we could tell wasn't moving. And she said, well, what you can't see is that these atoms are always moving. So we know that in our bodies are these little bitty vessels that carry the life force, and it carries the energy. All right, traditional Chinese medicine is very, very safe, but it looks at the person as a whole, not as a bunch of systems that need to, you go to the doctor, I've got bronchitis, they're going to give you something for that. I go to the doctor for kidney issues, they're going to give me something for that. In fact, in our Western medical system, we've got a nephrologist, we've got a pulmonologist, we've got a cardiologist. The family doctor is almost a thing of the past, and so we look at it very, very differently. So, at the heart of traditional Chinese medicine lies the principle known as the Yellow Emperor's Inner Classic. This is a book. This is a foundational text that has guided Chinese medicine for centuries. That champions the idea that prevention is preferable to cure. And we are all about that. We are all about preventing sickness and disease instead of curing sickness and disease. Now, here in the United States, in the state of Texas, we holistic practitioners are not allowed to cure any disease. If we say that we can cure any disease, we are, quote, practicing medicine without a license, and we can be arrested and fined and that kind of thing. So we agree with the traditional Chinese practitioners that prevention is better than cure. Really, nobody can cure anything. Your medicine does not cure you, it masks your symptoms. Traditional Chinese medicine does not cure you, it restores your body to health so that the symptom goes away. Same thing with bioenergetic medicine. It restores your body to health, it does not cure you. All right, there's a big, big difference there. So, what makes an exceptional traditional Chinese medicine or a naturopathic practitioner? What makes an exceptional person? Is it the ability to cure disease, or is it the ability to save a patient that is teetering on the brink of disease? Most accepted traditional Chinese practitioners excel at the early detection of illness, treating associated meridians or energy pathways and organs to halt the progression of disease. In traditional Chinese medicine, the body is viewed as a microcosm intricately linked in nature, where the organs interact dynamically. The 5 elements, wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, correspond with these organs: the liver, the heart, the spleen, the lungs, and the kidneys, respectively. So take that first list I gave you, take it, the second list I gave you, match them up, okay? So we'll do that again because you weren't paying attention, right? The elements are wood, which goes to your liver, fire, which goes to your heart, earth, which goes to your spleen, lungs, which is metal, and kidneys, which is water. All right, so that's how the traditional Chinese medicine would do a quote-unquote diagnostic, is that it would do it through the elements. Each of the 5 principal organs govern a specific emotion. Now, This was something that I did learn in holistic school, that your emotions live in your organs. And so sometimes your organ is not sick because of a pathogen, it's sick because of an emotion. And we know we have in our own English language the term, I am heart sick, right? I am heart sick. That doesn't mean your heart is sick. What it means is your emotions are not well. And so even though we don't have this in our medical practice here in Western medicine, we do know that instinctively because we say that, all right? So the liver corresponds with anger, the heart corresponds with joy, the spleen corresponds with overthinking or worry, the lungs correspond with grief, and the kidneys correspond with fear. So excessive emotions directly impact their corresponding organs. So you may know this, you may not know this, but think of somebody who's just lost a spouse or someone who's just lost a child. What organ of their body is going to be affected? It's going to be their lungs. So they may develop asthma, they may be developing bronchitis, they may have respiratory illness that won't go away, and that is because the emotion of grief lives in the lungs, and it hurts the lungs because it's a depressing emotion. And so people that go through that usually have some kind of respiratory dysfunction because of where grief lives. So the liver notably is sensitive to emotional fluctuations. It is particularly vulnerable. Recent studies linking psychological distress to elevated risk of liver disease mortality. Now, why is that? Because we do know that anger, bitterness, and resentment, these live in the liver and the gallbladder. And so we know from years of practice that when we've done liver cleanses, and we used to do liver cleanses as a part of our weight loss program, we've kind of evolved from that. We do it a little bit different way, but we did notice back in the day that when people would start working on their liver, start detoxing their liver, that they would get angry, they would get, just gritchy, they weren't easy to get along with, husbands and wives would start fighting with each other, and that's because as we're cleansing the liver from all of its pathogens, we're also releasing all of those negative emotions. And so I used to tell the spouses, look, we're fixing to do this, we're doing this together. If you find, and this is usually what would happen, they would be at the dinner table and they would be talking and different things, and they would just get irritated with each other, and it wasn't like for a real reason, they were just irritated. It's because that stored up emotion that had been in the liver started coming to the surface, and they just didn't really know what to do because they weren't mad, they didn't think they were mad. Well, they weren't mad, but what was happening is as the liver was detoxifying from its pathogens, the bacteria, the fungus, the virus, the whatever, it's also detoxifying from the emotions that are in that. And so that's something that's really, really exciting because, you don't want to have these negative emotions stuck in your organs. Now, there is a book. I'm not sure I remember the name exactly, so bear with me, but I think it's called Buried Emotions Never Die. I think it's called something like that. And it is a book, and it is a very interesting book, and it has every sickness, every disease, and the corresponding emotion that goes with it. And so if you've got a chronic disease that you can't figure out what's going on with this might be a book that that you would look at to try and figure out what's going on with you so that you can deal with the root of the problem, which is almost always emotional. There's another book called The Healing Code, and it is also about trapped emotions and how trapped emotions are connected with sickness and disease. So we're going to go back to the 5 elements. I'm going to show you some relationships, and then I'm going to tell you a fun story. So the 5 elements have a relationship of mutual generation and mutual restraint. Mutual generation refers to the cyclical processes where each of the 5 elements nourishes or promotes the growth of the next in a specific sequence. Wood fuels fire, fire enriches the earth produces metal, the metal yields water, and the water nourishes the wood. That creates a continuous loop, okay? Conversely, the control cycle ensures balance through restraint. Wood stabilizes the earth contains the water puts out the fire melts the metal, and the metal cuts the wood, and thus that maintains the equilibrium. Now, we don't think about that in our healthcare because we're here in the West. We don't think about that, but if you look at these principles and then you're working with me or someone like me who's used to looking at the body as a whole, we don't necessarily talk about the 5 elements, but we do look at the interaction between the elements. So a striking example of emotional control comes from, again, the Chinese annals of history, right? And it's talking about a traditional physician, and his name is, or it doesn't tell me his name. His name is Zhu Danzi. Now, I don't know if I pronounced that right. Y'all just give me a break here. Okay, he once treated a young man devastated by the death of his wife. Now, we know that grief does what? Lives in the lungs. He was devastated by the death of his wife. Grief overwhelmed him, and his health began to decline. In traditional Chinese medicine, excessive sorrow harms the lung, making the body more vulnerable to illness. Instead of prescribing herbs, the doctor employed wit. He leaned in seriously and said to the man, I see what your problem is. You're pregnant. In a few days, you'll give birth. Now, the man blinked and then broke into a fit of laughter. The great physician thinks that the man became pregnant. For the first time in days, laughter filled the room, and the absurdity of the diagnosis lifted the young man's gloom. Over the next several days, he continued to laugh heartily at jokes, and his spirit rose, his strength returned, and in time, the melancholy disappeared entirely. Traditional Chinese medicine physicians skillfully harnessed the cycle of control among the 5 elements to regulate emotions, using joy to counteract grief. By sparking laughter in a moment of sorrow, he healed the patient without prescribing any medications. Now, no doctor, however skilled, can help those who live recklessly, driven by unbridled desires and devoid of self-discipline. The wisest physicians prioritize guidance over medicine, teaching patients to cultivate the virtuous habits. In his essential prescriptions worth 1,000 gold for emergencies, this is a book, the traditional Chinese medicine physician Sun Samio wrote, if virtue and conduct are not cultivated, even miraculous elixirs cannot extend life. Conversely, he noted, by perfecting virtue daily, blessings arrive unbidden, longevity follows naturally, and this is, in essence, the nurturing of health. So this is their traditional philosophy, which modern science does support. Research shows that cultivating positive traits such as gratitude, compassion, self-discipline promotes healthier lifestyles, emotional stability, better sleep, and increased physical activity, stronger social bonds, all of which enhance overall health. Now, in a July study in 2024 published in JAMA Psychiatry, it involved nearly 50,000 older American women with the average age of 79. And it found that the women that had higher levels of gratitude were associated with a 9% reduction in mortality risk and a 15% decrease in cardiovascular deaths, highlighting the profound connection between emotional well-being and physical vitality. Now, when I was in naturopathic school, they started teaching us about the emotions that were in the organs. And so this is a true story. This is my true story. And I have 2 babies. Okay, I had one, had a great pregnancy. Now, I was sick the first trimester, several times a day with morning sickness, and so that was not all that great. But the pregnancy was after that was fine. Delivery was easy. APGAR score of 10, just great. Got pregnant again 2 years later, And I was filled with fear. And it wasn't, it was not logical, but I was afraid. I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to carry the baby. I was afraid the baby was going to be sick. I was afraid that I would make the baby sick. I was just afraid. It was just fear, 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 fear. So fast forward about this child, when this child was about in middle school, just started having these symptoms of overactive bladder. Went to the doctor, did cultures, there's nothing wrong, but this particular bladder was about the size of a thimble, and it was something that was really debilitating on her life. And so, we didn't know what to do. We did everything medical. We didn't know what to do. And when I was in holistic school, and I found out that fear lives in the bladder, right? Now, the child with the bladder issue was not a fearful child, all right? What had happened is I was pregnant with her. I had this illogical fear. Somehow, don't know how all this works. I'm just telling you a story, right? That illogical fear affected the fetus, all right? When she was in her early teenage years, she started having bladder issues. When I found out that I had had this irrational fear, it affects the kidneys, even though I didn't have any symptoms, right? My child had the symptom. And we know, because we know that things travel through the DNA. We know that emotions travel through the DNA. We know sickness and disease can travel through the DNA. We know all of these things happen. So I sat my child down and I said, look, when you were conceived, I had all these, irrational fears and da-da-da, whatever. And I think this is the root of your issue. And she just kind of looked at me, and I'm crying and she's crying. And we just did a little prayer, that God would heal her and all that kind of thing. And since that day, when we took authority over that fear, right, not had any kind of bladder issues. And so this is a true story from me, that fear lives in the kidney and the bladder, and it can affect, future generations. So what we want to do, the reason I'm telling you this story, the reason we're looking at the difference between traditional Chinese medicine, bioenergetic medicine, and traditional Western medicine is because we are seeing more and more and more that traditional Western medicine is just not getting the job done. Now, it's great if you have a car accident, get to the hospital quick, quick, quick. If you're having a heart attack, get to the hospital quick, because they are great at crisis management. When we are dealing with lifestyle issues, chronic disease is a lifestyle issue. Diabetes is a lifestyle issue. Obesity is a lifestyle issue. Cancer is a lifestyle issue. When we're dealing with lifestyle issues, Western medicine isn't really working for us, because all it's doing is masking the symptoms, not bringing health to those organs. So we want to be like the wise traditional Chinese medicine people, that they look at the body as a whole. We look at, is it pathogenic? Is it a virus? Is it a fungus? Is it a heavy metal, a chemical, whatever? Or is it just negative, trapped emotions? All of us have trauma. Life happens to all of us, okay? So in my case, my parents separated when I was 12, back and forth, didn't divorce until I was 21. That's a whole lot of years of trauma, okay? When I was 42, my husband died. That was a lot of trauma. It was trauma for me. It was trauma for my kids. When my kids are in trauma, I'm in trauma. That's just a lot of trauma. And so when we're dealing with life, just whatever life gives us, right? And we all have those kinds. Some people were bullied. Some people were raped. Some people were, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It's the trauma, and trauma gets locked in the tissues. And so when we're looking at the body as a whole, rather than an assembly line of parts, then we're going to have a much better result in bringing the body back to health instead of just masking symptoms. So I know that was a whole lot. It was like mind-blowing when I read this report about the different elements. Of course, we see If you've seen in my office, we do the heart rate variability, and it shows what it is, and then it'll put up the diagram of traditional Chinese medicine with the different elements, and it'll give me another diagram of Ayurvedic medicine with all of the different doshas there. And so these are all different concepts, but they treat the body as a whole. We want you to be looked at as a whole so that you can restore your health and recover the great ability to live your life the way you need to live your life. So that's what we're all about here at Abundant Health and Wellness. And it is the weekend. We always sign off with rest, recover, restore, rejuvenate, because that's what we need to do so we can make it through another week. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for being patient as we're dealing with all of our Facebook issues. And I hopefully will see you next Friday at 12 o'clock. Thank you for liking. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for commenting. Thank you for all the things that you do. And I will talk to you next week.